Hello, and welcome back to the Cricket and the King YouTube channel. So today we are going to be discussing the Pareto distribution of good and bad choices. All right, that sounds complicated, but all a Pareto curve is a parabolic curve, which means it's got a slow uptake followed by a really sharp rocket into the sky, or a slow downward slope followed by poof, absolute plummet into crisis. So we're going to talk about it. How does this Pareto curve move into the life of a young person? How do our good and bad choices affect how we live life and what happens in the future? Because it's hard to be future-minded when you're young. It seems like time goes really, really slow. And then you get older and suddenly you realize that time is rocketing and that the choices you made in the past had a deep effect on the outcomes that you've experienced during your life. So we're going to call this good up here. We're going to call this bad down here. All right? And then this is time. I'm going to point a little arrow. This is time. Okay? So this is good choices, okay? So we're going to say basic things like brushing your teeth, not slapping your sister, generally having a good moral compass and making correct choices, telling the truth, being honest, going to bed on time, doing your homework, those sort of things. Okay, and then these are bad choices. Bad choices can be like telling lies or staying up way too late, not going to sleep on time, being on your phone all the time, choosing not to participate in anything, doing drugs, having a good time, drinking a lot, partying, those sorts of things. Those are bad decisions. Now, I'm not here to discuss the morality of it. You can be like, well, I think partying is totally morally acceptable, and that's fine. That's up to you. But we're going to show how those choices affect you across time. So over time, we're gonna make this this is when you turn 18, okay? And let's say you're here. You're on the start of this curve, and you're making good choices. And it doesn't really look like things are changing that much for you. The structure of your life is not changing that much. So let's say you're making consistently bad choices, okay? And you're kind of going that way. And right now you see that this gap between here and here, it's pretty small, right? So it looks like a lot of fun. Say you have friends that are doing drugs, right? And they're like, oh man, it's awesome. I'm smoking so much weed and it feels so good and everything's awesome. And you are making good choices. You're going to bed on time. You're brushing your teeth. You're doing all the things you need to do. And you're like, man, if only I could make some bad choices. If only I was willing to be a little more fun and have a good time and, stay up a little later and whatever else. Now, I'm not saying you could never have fun. That's stupid, obviously. We're here to live life. You got to enjoy time with your friends. Sometimes I hang out with my friends. We stay up till 3 a.m., just talking or playing video games or whatever. But that is not an overall pattern, right? I'm talking about overall patterns of behavior, the ways you consistently behave in the world. So then we see as we keep going out, our choices begin to compound. And woo, we end up going into this takeoff zone. Now, I don't know if this goes all the way to 90. We'll call this like 100 over here, because let's assume that you're not going to live past that. But we'll call this that's bad math, but we'll call this like 30, this is 40, this is 50. It's so hard not to erase things on a whiteboard when you're left-handed. All of the left-handed people can agree in the comments. Anyway, so here you are, and that's your good choices, and then here are the bad choices, and then woof, you have this steep drop-off. So the problem in our lives, especially as young people, is that we see the decisions that people are making and we see that the gap between our good and bad decisions doesn't look like it creates that much change. And this is problematic because it makes it harder to make good choices consistently. It makes it harder to live in the world and be consistent with our good choices, right? But as we get older, we start to see this really big gap growing between us and our peers. And that's because our choices aren't all linchpin moments, meaning not everything in our life hangs on a single point, right? You either choose this job or that job, or you choose to live in this city or that city, and that's just going to totally change the course of your life. Now, there are really important decisions that we make in life. We need to be aware of those, and we need to think critically when we're trying to make those decisions and head in the right direction. But a lot of the decisions in our lives are just these little things, right? I keep saying brushing your teeth, but it's a dumb one, but it's a good point because it's such a little thing that we do, right? So we brush our teeth and then we end up having okay teeth when we're in our adult life, right? Or we don't brush our teeth and we end up having cavities and a ton of dental problems and needing dentures early in life. That's exaggerated. And of course, there are things you can do to protect your teeth. You can go to the dentist. You can, you know, not eat a ton of sugar, all those different things. But we'll see that as we get older, as we get out of the phase where it's super cool to do these bad things, that the decisions, as we consistently make more and more bad decisions, it doesn't just keep going in this nice steady decline. Our decisions compound. So if we're consistently making bad choices, there comes a point in our lives where suddenly things start dropping off a cliff and recovery becomes a lot harder. Getting out of that hole is much more difficult. Lots of people in life struggle with different things like addictions or bad habits or a self-harming propensity, right? Whether in their social relationships or in their romantic relationships, right? They just tend to hang out with a bad crowd and do the wrong things. But as we get older, we see that the choices compound. So it sounds really unfair, and it is unfair to some degree. But when we're young, we can't see that our good choices build up over time and that they will make a huge difference later on in life. Instead, we just see the here and now. We see the fun that we're missing out on, right? We see the parties that we're not going to. We see the drinking that we're not doing. We see, all of these bad things happening, but it's not affecting this gap, right? Because a person that's here, suddenly, say they hit 18 or 25, and they start making consistently good decisions, well, it's not hard to get to that curve. Now, obviously, your upward trajectory will be a little later in life, but it's not hard. But as we move out past and we've made consistently bad decisions, it becomes a lot harder for us to begin that upward trajectory. Now, I'm not saying that you can't change, that things in your life can't be different, and that you can't improve things from the place you are. What I am saying is that your choices really matter. The little choices that you make matter in life. And the more that we choose the good, the more that we choose the responsible and healthy thing to do, the more that those rewards will compound as we get older. And the gap that we'll see as we get older and grow with our peers is we'll see this big gap between people that have made good decisions and bad decisions. Now, obviously, like I said, I'm not saying you can't change. I'm not saying that somebody couldn't be all the way down here in their 50s and be living on the streets of, Vancouver is the place I know because I'm Canadian, but, East Hastings Street, which is where all the drug addicts hang out. They could be hanging there and then they suddenly choose to change their life, right? And then they make these good decisions and there's help out there for them and that's good. But that upwards trajectory, it's going to be really hard for the compounding decisions of their life to take great effect. Now, I obviously believe in the redemption of people. I believe all people are valuable. I think you can make good decisions and God can change your life, Lord willing. But you need to be aware that although you can't see it when you're young, although you can't perceive the differences that the choices in your life are making, you will be able to see it much better when you're older. You'll be able to see this big gap. I know for something that I've seen in myself is fitness. So I've been a pretty in shape guy my whole life, and I've worked out fairly consistently, right? And I had lots of friends that didn't work out, and I had lots of friends that did work out. And so we all went through life, and there's not a big gap really. When you're young, you have great potential, like you're healing really fast, your muscles really fast, your metabolism is really fast. So all these things make it much easier to stay in shape, right? And I'm like, sometimes I wonder, I'm like, why do I work out? Why do I bother staying in shape? But as I've gotten older, the choices for me to continue to work out and be healthy and eat good food, etc., have all compounded so that now I'm at a level of fitness that's easy to maintain, and I don't have to do a lot of backtracking to get to the place that I want to be. I'm kind of where I want to be right now, right? I'm in reasonable shape. I have reasonable athleticism. I'm able to participate in sports and play with my kids and do all those good things. So those choices compounded for me over time, and I'm on the upwards trajectory and seeing the benefits of my decision across time. Now, I have other people in my life that I know of that have made rougher decisions in regards to their health, right? Maybe they're choosing, I'll eat a bag of chips instead of taking the time to cook dinner, or I'm not going to work out, or I'm not going to go for a walk, or I'm not going to do the things that are useful to me. And that it doesn't really affect you when you're young, honestly. I know guys that look like Adonises in high school, and Adonis is like a Greek statue. Anyway, they had this great physique and they barely put any effort in. They had great genetics and all these good things were happening. But then as we don't work out and we make those consistently bad decisions, maybe we start to gain weight, right? And now it becomes more difficult to start on that upward trajectory. Maybe you've affected some things. Your skeletal structure is affected by the amount of muscle you hold on your frame, and your metabolism is affected by the amount of fat you're holding in your body. And obviously your metabolism is very variable genetically, and somebody who's strong and healthy, you'll look different, way different than all kinds of different people. There's guys that are powerlifters, super strong, in super good shape, and they look like a big barrel of a human being, right? And then there's people that are great triathletes and they're super fit and they're super strong and they're just skinny little beanpole people, right? I'm kind of somewhere in the middle of those two things. So we have these decisions that we make, but then it compounds, right? It's much harder to lose 20 unnecessary pounds than it is to maintain the good choices that you've already made. Now, this example might seem a little bit unnuanced and not super deep, but it's just the clearest one I can give of the kind of thing we need to think about as we're making choices as we grow up. It's really important that we see how our good choices compound and benefit us, and how our bad choices, although it might not seem like they're making a difference in our lives over the last however many years, we'll see those bad decisions actually compound and become much harder to make the necessary change. It becomes much harder to make the necessary changes and bring our lives back into a place of compounding good choices, right? Because we have this big hill to climb. So I'm not trying to say any of this to discourage you. And if you are somebody who feels like they've been making the wrong choices in life, there's hope for you. You can change. You can make a difference in your own life and start on that upward trajectory, okay? And I encourage that. But if you're a young person especially, I want to encourage you that even though it looks like less fun and it feels really restrictive and you're like, oh, I hate this, I don't like studying, I don't like working out, I don't like doing whatever you have to do, right? Those good choices, eventually they'll compound and bear fruit or have good results in your life. All right. So that's my lesson for today. I hope it was helpful for you. Feel free to like and subscribe. The reason that I'm doing this YouTube channel is that I'm writing a book that should be out before the end of the year. It is called The Young Man's Manifesto. I play that as a play on words on the Communist Manifesto, because my manifesto is much different than the Communist Manifesto. It's kind of completely antithetical to it, but I thought it would be a funny title. So you can buy that book when it comes out, and thank you for taking the time to watch me. I value that. So I'll see you on the next one. Have a good one. Bye now.